So we have questions and discussion, and before we start the questions, I have a little advertisement. We need your help. We need everyone to become a member of the Schiller Institute, to subscribe to our publications, to help us speak about these ideas, both the danger of war and the alternative. What future we can actually build if we gather the political will to do so. So you can become a member at the table, and also this pamphlet we printed up special for this meeting, which has the text of Hussein's speech at the conference in Germany. It has this speech of Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and it has the fact sheet about the terrorism, and also the speech by the Egyptian engineer about the Africa Pass program, and also Lyndon LaRouche. So that's also available there. So, questions, comments?
Yes, what about the population bomb? Because we don't have enough, we can't produce enough for all these people.
Oh,
so we have to send them to Mars, or what do we have to send
no,
them?
that's why I took the example of Egypt. 80 million people.
That's right.
80 million people live on 5% of the land. What we can do is that we can, if you look at this desert area, it's 13 million square kilometers. Then if you compare that area to the population areas in the world, China, India, Europe, Western Europe is the most populated part of the world per square meter.
Density. Population density.
Density, yes. And the United States, if you compare that area, that desert area can have 6 billion more people living there with a decent living standard if it's developed. Resources are not limited. Resources can be created. If we use our creativity, if we use scientific development, what we call natural resources will change. We have very clear examples from our ancestors. If you look at the base of natural resources for a man from the Stone Age, what was the base of the resources? They also said we have limited resources. But what did they burn for fuel? You know, they had just to pick wood. But then you take 100 or 200 years later, 1,000 years later, the base of what we call natural resources changed completely. We have totally new resources which did not exist previously. And then with the Industrial Revolution, which followed the European Renaissance, and we have the Industrial Revolution, we have created or developed new resources which were never known to the human race before. So the limit on natural resources is the limit of the technology and the level of knowledge we have. It's not the resources that are limited in the ground, it's our knowledge which is limited. So what we can do is we can develop our knowledge of these resources and technologies of creating new resources, and then we can change the whole map.
I think also if you get a good development starting in the Middle East and in other poor areas in the world, the population bomb will be demoted, because you see in all countries that when people's living standard go up, there not need so many children.
That's right.
This is the power.
Yeah, you take
in old days in Denmark 200 years ago, it was in the countryside, people get 8 or 10 children. That's not normal today.
Yeah, because of poverty.
And then the same thing will happen in the Middle East, I'm sure.
Yes, you will have a bit of a leveling up of the extremes, but yes, you cannot, if you reduce population growth, you create a crisis on the opposite direction, where you have an aging population which cannot be
of course not
supported.
Like in China, but it will come like a natural thing of the growing standard in the people.
Yes,
people by nature will not need and have so many children like they have now in poor areas.
Yes, your priority is to develop the living standards of the people and give them education and give them the means of a decent living. And then that process will take care of itself. Natural reproduction, this is a norm in nature. We cannot just change it, but what we can do is that we can, you change the behavior of people, because the reason why people needed 10 children here in Europe, because most of them would die before the age of 5. The rest that you need to work in the field. But when the economy developed, children don't die easily. Hope we are grateful for.
You see it already now in some good developing African nations. You see that the number of children go down from just in one generation. It can fall from 6, 8 children to 2 or 3.
Yeah, but we shouldn't be scared by that. Human beings are a resource.
Yeah.
More children is more resources. Not in a materialistic view, but in a real sense.
The sense of ideas.
Yes, exactly. And people who can solve problems if they are giving a decent education and living conditions. So that, and also we human beings, as the German space pioneer, he says it's a natural part of human beings and society to explore new places. You know, we explore new land, we explore new continents, but it's even natural for us to explore other planets. You know, this is our next step. It's natural, it's not artificial, that we want to go somewhere else and build a civilization. And this should be the goal, is not saying, well, what are the problems if we do this or that? You know, we have to have an objective, we have to have a mission, which is not just 1 year or 10 years or even 50 years. We have to have a mission for the human race into the future. We do what our part and we let the others do their part. But what we do, we take what our predecessors gave us, we make it better, we make it more beautiful, and we deliver it to the others. Then we leave some notes for them, how to deal with it, how we successfully made it, and some ideas and tips, and then they continue. But you need to give them a great culture based on ideas, beautiful ideas, so that you know that this will be sustained, it will continue.
All these ideas are very costly,
Yeah.
right?
Well, they don't cost, in what sense?
Well, you have to finance all the pumps, all the railroads, all the
Yes.
Infrastructure that you talked about.
Yeah.
And to me, it seems pretty costly.
Yeah, that's...
How does that link with your 3-step of how to, what you say, to control the financial market?
Yes, we...
Because somebody has to pay that, and as I can see, no country alone have enough money to do this. So they have to use the money in the world, and they are funded by everybody else.
Yeah, well, it depends on what your definition of money is, because money is not...
But you said that the infrastructure has to be funded or
yes, that's
by the governments.
Yes, if we go back to the 3 steps, sorry, do you want to say something on that?
Yeah, just a quick comment. Those money could get from ending wars, first of all.
Well, that's a good idea. But the thing is, what we do it the way people did it. That's why we take the example of the United States. That the United States, in different stages of its history, managed to create what we call money out of even debt. Because you take the power of the government and you take the power of the idea of that you have to build a society and develop a society. That's your credit. And then you create the means of financing the types of projects. That's why we say, first of all, we take all the fictitious money out of the system. Money is being printed, produced. We take that out. That has no value. The only money which has value is money which is created for a purpose of development of society. And governments, like the government of the United States, according to the Constitution, and what Alexander Hamilton did, is that can use that future credit of your nation to produce monetary value, so-called money, or debt actually. All new money is a type of debt to the future. But based on your plans for using that money in developing the productivity of society, then you know that this debt will be many times, redeemed before even it should be paid. So the government of a people have the right to produce the financial resources or the money based on its credit that it has a mission, a plan to develop certain areas of the economy. This is what the United States did after the Liberation Wars. Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, he established, I think, the first national bank of the United States. And all the states of the United States, they had just come out of the war with the British, and they were completely bankrupt. They had enormous amounts of debt because they needed to finance their war of liberation. And he said, well, no problem. We take that debt and put it in one package, and then we issue new debt based on our idea to rebuild the country. And then the government and the Congress, or the elected, in the case of the Congress, they can actually let the US government produce that credit, so-called money, and circulate it either directly through government institutions to finance specific infrastructure projects, or through private banking system, which will loan that money to people and companies who will build these national projects. But first you have to have an idea what you want to do with your nation. What is this nation's mission is and purpose? What do you need to build and produce? And then based on that intention, you can create credit or debt to finance these things. And then you use the rest of the resources, because you have private resources, deposits of people, all kinds of things you have in society, but you have to channel them into the right investment. It should be productive investment. Right now we have money is worthless, actually, basically, if you go to a strict economic measurement of the value of all the money which is in the world. There's no, if you even include the debt, it's like the Greek debt. It's many, many times larger than the whole Greek economy for many, many years. So how did that happen? What did they buy to, to have all that debt now? It's all fictitious debt. It has no value. The only debt which has value is the debt which a government or a nation takes based on its intention to develop that economy, based on this type of infrastructure projects. And of course, nations can even help each other, it's like the Marshall Plan. I mean, the Marshall Plan, the United States did not pay money, they just guaranteed. They said, don't worry, go build this, we pay you, you know? And they didn't have to pay it. Because what you do is that you put society to work.
It was actually credit for buying U.S. tractors and U.S. equipment.
Yeah, you relaunch the economy, and then it takes a life of its own. But the idea was clear. You rebuild the economy of the nation. And then you take that debt and destroy it later. It becomes...
But how will you finance it? I mean, all these projects, how will you do it?
Yeah, well, we have, like in the case of Nawapa.
Yeah, but you told us about Africa, how you could solve the problem of Africa.
Yeah, well, the African nations, they won't be able to do this on their own, of course. So therefore, we are talking about some sort of a Marshall Plan. But then in each of these nations, we have actually resources. But they can also do the same thing. If we have a world economic and financial system which is based on these ideas, then the major powers will even allow the smaller nations, or the nations who are not so developed right now, to do the same thing. They can even acquire credit and guarantees to start launching national development programs, long-term credit agreements, based on what these nations can pay back when they have stood on their own feet.
Yes.
I mean, the Chinese do that.
Yes.
The Chinese do this in Africa. They don't get money. I mean, they built one of the largest dams in Sudan. I went there and visited it in Sudan. And the Chinese did not take money. They provided the credit from their own banking system as guarantees to the Chinese companies who built the project, and also European companies who built the project. And they had an agreement to get oil from Sudan when the oil is developed in the future. You know? So Sudan did not have to pay so much money to build the dam. The Chinese did not pay so much. I mean, they paid a portion because you need to buy equipment and so on and pay companies who are not government companies, and they build these things. So the real question is, what do you want to do? And then the next question is, say, okay, how do we finance that? What kind of agreements we have within the nation and among nations to finance these kinds of projects, knowing that these will be productive, these will be successful. It's not like an adventure.
But you have to be sure that your project is going to be successful. Otherwise,
yes,
it can be a failure. So it is some kind of dangerous. But you can say, as the situation is now in the world, it might be more dangerous not to do anything.
Yes.
Helena had a question.
Yeah, I was wondering if you've had people say that even these water projects, if you build them, that it will not stop wars and it will not make people, will not make different religions and, fighting each other. What do you tell these people?
Yeah, well, the usual thing is people hear, I hear from people say, the reason we cannot have development is because we have a corrupt government. So what we do first, we take away the corrupt government.
That's a part of the problem too.
Yeah, and then they say after that we will think about the economy.
Yeah.
So I mean, people like to talk about revolutions. It's like in the North Africa and Southwest Asia, so-called Arab Spring. I mean, when these things started in Egypt, I mean, I'm no friend of Mubarak or Gaddafi, and these people, they worked with the British and the United States, and they implemented the policy which was given to them by the World Bank and IMF to destroy their own economies. And they were part of the so-called war on terrorism. And they were allies with Britain and the United States many years. But the idea of revolution, this was not a revolution. Revolution needs ideas. Before you start a revolution, you have to have a complete idea what you want to do with that nation. What happened in Tunisia and Egypt, for example, which was the best example of these, is this was an uprising. People were angry. Their future was stolen from them. Young people work hard to get a good education, but then they have no work, they have no future. They either have to take a boat over the Mediterranean, maybe they make it or not. That's their only chance. Or work as slave labor in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. That's where the view of the world. So these people got fed up. And these people knew that the policy their government was implementing was supported by the EU and the United States. So those people were angry. And it was the right thing, in a sense, to do. People have to protest against injustice. But what happened is that this became militarized. Because the British, the United States, other European countries, they saw a great potential that this could spread to Europe, because Europe is Greece, Spain, Portugal was in the same situation, and that their policies to control the so-called Euro crisis would not work. And therefore they moved to another phase of this thing by militarizing this conflict and say, okay, now we support those people to overthrow these corrupt dictators who were our friends yesterday. And then we started this series of so-called regime change policies, and now we have wars and terrorism spreading all over the place. So the idea of revolution, that's not really a revolution. The American Revolution was a revolution because it had already principles and ideas for how to establish what they call a more perfect society. And what is the purpose of that society? It's not just get rid of the British. They wanted to establish something better, and they had a very clear idea of their mission. But people who revolted in these countries, they had no idea, and then other people came as opportunists and said, now we take the advantage, these Islamic movements, Muslim Brotherhood. They say, now that the West wants to help, why not? We worked with them. We worked in Afghanistan, we worked with them now. But that's the real problem. The peace process with the Palestinians and the Israelis, LaRouche said, if you don't start with economic development, forget about peace. You cannot make political agreements if the people are hungry and thirsty and have no work and so on. And that's why religious fundamentalism takes root in these places right now, because they use the desperation and anger of the people and the young people. And then people come with bags of money from Saudi Arabia and Qatar and say, well, we can solve your problem. You become a soldier working for us. And you've got sanctions, you get approval from the United States and Europe right now, so go ahead, overthrow your corrupt dictators. But that will never help. It never helped, and this is not going to help. What we can do is that we can have, like in Syria, we can have a ceasefire, have a diplomatic solution, but then tell the people that our commitment in Europe and the United States is to help you build your economy, give a better future for your children and coming generations, and these things could be solved gradually.
Yes. My question is, how do you convince the governments, if the governments are members of a spoiled elite which actually benefit from the empire?
That's right.
How can you convince the government as long as the empire is still more or less paying them, feeding them?
Yeah, that's why we have to destroy the empire.
Yes.
Or not let it destroy us at least, because that's the real fight is. Because you cannot change the world from Iraq or Syria, I think, because the world system, the global system is unjust. It's based on the idea of empire. The powerful control the weak. This is social Darwinism. They believe in that. Tony Blair, he's one of the most vicious, poisonous people who's spreading this kind of stuff. I mean, at the Nobel Prize, when the EU got the Nobel Prize, he wrote an article that was published in many countries, the same day the EU got the Nobel Peace Prize. And he said the idea of the EU 60 years ago was peace among the Europeans. But now it's about power.
You wrote that?
Yeah, he wrote that. There is it. I have the text. It was published in Sweden. And then he says it's not only power. He says China, India are growing. They have enormous population. They have enormous economic ambitions. They are building a powerful economy, powerful military. And we have to do something in Europe to counter that. And that's the purpose of the EU. It's not peace, it's power. He said that. And that's the view of the people who actually run them. I mean, Blair is an advisor to Obama indirectly. He's running the so-called Group of Four, the peace process in the Southwest Asia. He's advisor to most governments in the Gulf. He gets paid for it, Blair Associates. He gets paid for being advisor to the United Arab Emirates, to Saudi Arabia. And he gives them that poison, saying the world is run by the empire. You're either with the empire or you end up like Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein. We will hang you. And that's the world system. That has to change before we can tell people, look, you are corrupt, you are this, you are that. We are corrupt. We are allowing our governments to participate in this terrorism against the world.
Yeah. See if I can explain this properly. These projects that you've shown, I find really interesting. And at first I thought it would be a gargantuan task to get the world's governments to cooperate to build them. But then you said, which I found very interesting, examples from Africa, where because a poor country which has rich natural resources can use those natural resources to, even though they have no money or at all, they can sell them to get other countries like China to realize the projects. So, like, I couldn't remember all the projects, but like Afghanistan, like you said, they have like large mines there, like they have like ample opportunity if they could just like if they could be convinced on the political level to use those resources to build like some of these watering systems or whatever to benefit their country in the future. I was thinking there was like in Africa and then the Southwest Asia region. How many of those countries have rich resources where we could use that strategy also?
I mean, all these countries have, like if you talk about raw materials and natural resources, all these countries have them.
Yeah, it's just a matter of utilizing them to...
Yeah, I mean, most of the resources of these countries are being burned, either in war or exported or invested in skyscrapers in Dubai, and which benefit nobody, or being invested in banks in other countries.
Yeah.
So there are resources in these countries, both
so
natural.
It's just a matter of convincing the
how you
local
channel them.
governments.
Yeah, you have to channel them into a different process, different activity.
Actually, we could like maybe not the biggest projects, but the smaller ones. We could entirely just forget the EU and just like maybe China or some other country who really needs the resources and make them collaborate to build the projects.
No, as I said, China cannot build the world by themselves.
No.
And then we cannot forget the EU and Europe, because we need to develop Europe. Because we're having enormous social problems in Europe right now, and they will become political problems when some people will think that what was done in the 30s was the right thing. You know, fascism coming back to control the population. But we don't need that. I mean, Europe can become free from the EU, they can become free from this financial system, and they can use their enormous knowledge. I mean, look just at Denmark. I mean, it's many projects which I looked at, the Danish companies who have made the studies, massive infrastructure projects. Denmark, they are good in water projects, agricultural projects, all kinds of things. You have enormous potential in Europe and Denmark and Europe, which is being lost right now, rather than being used. Why? Because governments say we have to save the financial system first. So we use austerity, we save money to pay for the financial system.
But it's just so hard to convince the political elites in Europe to do anything else.
Yeah.
To be pressured basically to do it. That's why I found it so interesting that you could use the local governments and some other countries who could by themselves, without the the established elite in Europe and America, to do it. Some of the smaller projects only, of course, by themselves. Yeah,
there is like Ethiopia. We had the Ethiopian general consul in our conference, and he presented this the Millennium Dam. It's the largest dam being built in Africa. It's very, very big. It's like 6,000 megawatt electricity. It's more than Ethiopia needs of electricity. They're going to export it to Kenya, and they got no help from Europe. Actually, the World Wildlife Fund for Nature and other organizations made campaigns against that project. So they didn't get any funding. What they did is of course they talked to the Chinese, but what they did is they mobilized the Ethiopian people and Ethiopians abroad to buy bonds, government bonds, to finance the dam. And Ethiopians are very patriotic, maybe you know some people. They love their country a lot, and many people are buying bonds to finance the dam. They have campaigns in the country. They are even asking their neighbors to contribute, the poor countries, because they will get electricity. So these things can be done. It's not about money. It's about who's capable of building them, and then trusting that the result will be good, that they will benefit from that in the future. So, it's people think that for some project to be productive, they have to get money back. That's not the purpose of it. What do you do with money if you don't have food?
Couldn't agree more.
But all these projects, I mean, there are a lot of these things that are already being built. They can be started quickly, but they are small steps. What we need is, if we use the power of all the world economy to do that, then you will have a totally different. But all these things can be done. It's nothing super difficult. But all these nations have their plans. But like Syria today, do you think they can build any water project now in the middle of this mess? They can't, even though they need it. I mean, Syria was exporting wheat a few years ago. Now the people are hungry. They can't eat. So
People starving there now.
yeah,
And dying from the cold in the winter.
yes. So we are creating a tragedy in a country which was relatively stable, and actually there wasn't much poverty in Syria. I mean, I'm not the supporter of the Syrian government, but they had a social system, an economic system which supported everyone, and they used their resources very wisely. I mean, in spite of all the sanctions and problems. So that these things can be done. There's no problem. It's the policy that has to be changed, the attitude. And it's both this imperialist view, but also people are reluctant to support these ideas because of the so-called environmentalist problem. Because they think any big project will create environmental problems. This is what people have learned. 40 years of counterculture and environmentalism. They talk about dams, roads, railways, nuclear power. Say, oh, no, this is dangerous. This is going to destroy nature. This is going to kill people. So people are indoctrinated so they don't support this kind of big thinking.
What I see the big challenges here out of your presentation and discussion here, the biggest challenge is to convince people to invest in this.
Mm. Yeah.
Excellent ideas, actually. It's a vision we have, but we need.
Yeah, that's why we need people to work with us to get more people, because I don't think any reasonable politician who can see this and they can see that this is going to help, it's going to work. They wouldn't be able to say that, you know, this is stupid, this is, you know, but they need to be told that. They need to be pressured and say, look, we should stop supporting terrorists in Syria. We should support Syria with machines and technical support and stuff to build these things.
Or not being so directly, stop being terror, stop supporting terrorists, because it's like indirectly attack to them. Maybe indirectly try to convince them there are a big, huge investment.
Yeah.
This idea.
We can do that,
like,
but
that's what I say. I think the most challenge here, the biggest challenge is like to make people to work on another vision, how we can convince people.
Yeah.
And realize this idea.
Yeah, I think
so
this.
Now we have like a vision with to develop countries, different countries, pure countries. Now we need an idea how to convince people.
Right.
So
Yeah.
maybe that's what we are going to work in the future.
Right. Yeah, that's it. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I see a problem because people are being so much misguided by the media, by the press, because when you read about what's going on in, well, now I should say Southwest Asia, in our press, newspapers and TV, you know, you get a total different picture.
Yeah, sure.
So people, I mean, if you just speak to people, normal people, they don't understand what's actually going on.
Yeah, that's a tragedy, but now things are becoming so obvious. I mean, that's why we're trying to get these facts to people, at least in governments and in Congress and so on. I mean, the media, it's difficult to, because they are bought by, I mean, they are owned by these interests. The ownership, physical ownership of the media is by these imperialist forces, and they don't want to change their policy. I mean, what we can do is that we can call those people and say, look, I know you are embarrassed that you supported this and it turned out to be terrorist groups. The evidence is there, you know, but you can change. You know, you don't have to apologize, just tell the truth, you know, so they don't feel embarrassed about it. But we have to call those people and say, look, we had a Swedish newspaper which said terrorism is spreading even more after bin Laden was killed than before bin Laden was killed. And they have a map of the world, it's exactly like we presented, and there they have Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, And then they don't mention Syria. They go to Libya, Mali, Niger, Mauritania. But they forgot about Syria. They don't want to say that there are Al-Qaeda in Syria because they have dug themselves so deep in saying we support the revolution in Syria. They can't say that simple fact because even the US State Department is saying the most effective group in Syria is the Ansar, this Jabhat al-Nusra, who are the terrorists. So
it is coming up now in the Danish media, in the Danish big newspapers like Politiken and Berlingske. I mean, look and see, and in the homepage you can find out that journalists are going discussing that Syria is not a black-white case. It's some of the white people are very gray. that the so-called freedom fighters are not just freedom fighters. Some of them are good-hearted people, but many of them are also damn terrorists. You know? Al-Qaeda people coming from other countries, Libya and... Because now it's going on there, then they go there.
No, I mean, the source of the whole thing is this...
And simply criminals also, who just want to steal and take everything.
Yeah, look at these people in Mali or Algeria. This guy, Mukhtar Bil Mukhtar, who was the leader of the group, he's called Marlboro Sheikh, you know. He's smuggling cigarettes. And an expert, a UN expert on drugs, he said there is not a jihadist Islamist group in the world which is not involved in drug trafficking. There is none, because that's the easiest way to get money for weapons. And that's the easiest way to learn how to infiltrate countries, because you have to know all the roads on the borders. And that's the way you buy people who control the borders. So most of the terrorism is financed by drug money. It's coming from Afghanistan. And then these guys, they work in that business, and then they get direct support from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, our allies.
And then what's the money? Why in the big bank called HB something?
Yes, and then that money is laundered through the big British and other banks.
In the washing machines.
Yes. So these are very obvious things. I mean, these guys are, I mean, you talk about Islam, these are not religious groups. These are criminal gangs and political forces. These are killer machines for political purposes, and they can be hired. That's why they change position the whole time. One day they work with the Americans, one day they work against the Americans, you know. Because that's their character, that's their nature. So that's a big problem, sorry.
So it's basically one big web of crime, actually. We can put aside the Muslimism, the jihadism, we can put aside the Christianism or the Judaism or whatever. It's one big crime web, actually. Controlling behind the scenes.
Yeah. I mean, there are books, I mean, we have written about that. We wrote the story about how the British intelligence, the CIA, and others have created these Islamic movements. MI6, there are authors who have whole books about that. I mean, we started it, but then there are people who have time and energy to research. There is a book called The British State Alliances with Radical Islam. John Curtis, I think, is the author. He is very, very well documented how the MI6 have worked with these groups. I mean, all these groups, they were offices in London. I mean, in 95, 96, 97, when I was working in our office in Germany, we were following these. They were sending us faxes with information, because they sent faxes to all newspapers. Communicate. Bin Laden, he had an office in London. You know, I have piles of faxes from his office, which was sent to the media, including to the EIR. And his manifestos, and the address is there in London. And the telephone and fax, and that was in 94, 95, but then he moved to Sudan. But his people kept working in London. And then they changed the name of the group. They are still there. There are two people, Saad al-Faqih and Mohammed Masari. They have a political organization. They are very often on BBC talking about Saudi Arabia, because they say we are opposition to the Saudi government. But they don't show them so much now. But when they want to blackmail the Saudis, they bring them on TV. That's why the Arabic BBC was shut down by the Saudis who were financing it. And therefore, all the people from BBC moved to Qatar and they built Al Jazeera. It's the BBC. It's the same people, the same programs. They had just changed the name. This was BBC Arabic. But when they started attacking the Saudis in 95, 96, and bringing the Osama bin Laden people on TV, interviewing them about all the problems in Saudi Arabia, and then the Saudis say, we finance you for God's sake. So they shut down the satellite service, which the Orbit, it's called Orbit. And BBC disappeared, BBC Arabic. So the Qataris, after the coup in Qatar, he said, bring them here. So, but London was all the terrorist groups, they have offices in London.
But also, if you rewind to what you said about Tony Blair, you really have an imperative to be revolutionary. Because of what he's talking about, it's not just power, it's powerful war. And basically, this is going to be a revival of a Nazi empire, and we're going to be right along with it. In Denmark.
Yeah.
But who you said that Tony Blair was financed? Who actually pays him?
Who pays
Tony Blair? Who pays Tony Blair?
I mean, Tony Blair, he gets money from all kinds of directions for giving consultancy. There's a called Blair Associates, a company, a consultancy company.
Right.
And he, officially, he's an advisor to certain governments. In the Gulf, for example.
Is he still the, special envoy?
For peace, yeah. Yeah, for the quartet. He's the envoy for the quartet. I mean, Tony Blair is going to give us the peace process, revive the peace process. This is a joke. But what he does, he goes into the negotiations and sabotage them. It's like when the Iran negotiations started with the US and Europe, like the 5+1 talks. At the time when Blair was the head of the EU, he was presiding over the talks. And he said, well, I can give the Iranians a good proposal. I mean, why do they need uranium and nuclear power? We can help them develop their oil industry. So they don't need nuclear power. And the other Europeans said, well, that sounds good. We want to help the Iranians. They don't need to build nuclear power. Yeah. And then when the Iranians freaked out and said, this is crazy, the Iranians withdrew from the negotiations, and Blair said, look, the Iranians, they don't want to cooperate with us, and then the whole thing collapsed. And it has not been revived yet. So Blair went in to say, I have a nice proposal to make the process work. But in reality, what he was saying, he knew that the Iranians will say no. And then the whole thing will collapse. And now everybody blames Iran for that it collapsed. But it was Tony Blair's idea.
He made Iran look bad.
Yeah. But you got to know those people. And in many cases, I mean, these are the personal enemies of ours. They try to destroy our movement, our organization. Like this guy from the Zayed Center said, why all those superpowers so worried about LaRouche, And he was totally puzzled.
But it's basically evil powers very much dominating.
Yeah, and then there are stupid people who just follow.
Right.
Like in the case of the Congress, I mean, it was not, they are not evil people, they are just cowards. They can't stand for the principles they should know is the basis for it.
Some of the interests pushing these programs are, I'd say, evil people.
Yeah. No, there are certain people who believe in this as an ideology. It's like this Darwinism.
Yeah, sure.
Malthusianism, this is, they say it's scientific.
Right.
And this social Darwinism, this is natural law for them.
They cannot consider themselves evil. They sort of justify it there.
Yeah, and all empires are based on that.
Exactly.
This is what the Greeks tried to fight against,
Yes.
That metaphorically the gods playing with the small human beings, manipulating them, putting them against each other, killing and slaughtering each other for fun. Exactly. This is what Zeus and these guys were doing up there,
So
the Olympian gods.
So in a way, gods and devils the same.
Yeah, there are people who believe they are like God.
Exactly.
You know? Because they can control the fate of so many millions of people.
But they're in fact demonic.
Yes.
They're what they call the liberals, because they are free from morals and free from taking responsibility.
Yeah, I mean there are people who can be changed. You know, I don't think people are intrinsically evil. I think there are other people who are so entrenched into this inhuman ideology. It's very difficult to save them. But at least you can keep them aside so they don't harm somebody.
Yeah, that's right.
Or take them away from power. But using, you know, law and constitutions and political means. That's why people have to become active politically.
Exactly.
No? The challenge is big. It looks terrible, but we have no other way. We have to fight.
I mean, just one thing, because the Danish foreign minister came out last week saying, okay, we're going to help by sending a Hercules plane for the Mali operation. Think what would have happened if he instead had come out saying, we're going to help, we're going to promote this massive economic development program for the whole of Southwest Asia. We're going to go in with this and that and, you know, come out with the program that Hussein has outlined today. Think what that would have done to totally change the agenda in the world population, and that's really our purpose. I mean, I also attended a press conference of Kupit Kleist, who is the premier of Greenland, last week. The Arctic and the deserts and space, these three areas, these are the great new frontiers for the world. If we can start a massive recovery program in the United States, in Europe, in the developing countries, based on really taking on the new frontiers of making the deserts green, of making the Arctic areas a new major transportation and economic development areas, and if we can actually have a program of going to the moon, going back to the moon, going to Mars, taking these things, you know, this is what we have to, this development perspective we have to get through, and that's our political task.
This will be like a dress rehearsal for colonizing Mars, because you have to develop certain areas, you have to develop technologies that you don't have to deal with certain problems, because in extreme climate, very cold and very hot, you have to have special materials, you have special types of machines, you have special technology to deal with these things. And I know that the NASA, they do rehearsals in Morocco in the desert for missions on Mars, like these what do you call them? These Curiosity and these things, or in the desert in the United States. So simulations, they do simulations on the climate on Mars in the desert. But what we need is that, okay, when you change this desert, you will need to develop certain agricultural and water and other technologies which you can take with you to Mars, because it's similar climate. It's extreme climate, too hot, too cold sometimes. And maybe the soil doesn't support. So you have to change the soil of Mars. You know, you can create artificial soil. I met in the conference after my speech, a German engineer came to me, he was attending as a guest, and he said, and he said, I have to show you this. And I said, what? He said, he started pulling his company's brochure, and he was doing these things, but he said, we create new soil in Egypt because the sand, things don't grow, because the water doesn't hold, the minerals don't hold, the roots don't hold in the normal sand, like on the beach. It's too fine, so you have to create a level of soil, it's called humus, which the plants can use, and then they can transform the rest of the soil. So it's like a 5-10 centimeter layer. And his company, they use biological material, waste, garbage, plants, trees, old trees, and they mix it, they let it ferment somehow, and they create a new soil. And they showed me these projects they do in the desert in Egypt. And he has statistics, how productive it was, what is the difference, and he says this is even ecological food production. You use this new soil, you don't need a lot of fertilizer. And he was so excited, he said, I'm not doing this for money, I'm not doing this for money, I really want to help people. And then you go around and you find all kinds of people who are doing all these things,
So the ideas there, and the people are there.
They want to work. They are waiting.
Goes there, that's the problem.
Sorry?
The investment.
There is no investment. There is no policy say, do this, build this.
Yeah.
We'll help you. So it's, there are good people in the world who want to do great things, but they don't get any opportunity.
But LaRouche and Schiller Institute talked a couple of years ago about NASA shutting down departments and a lot of financing. So this Mars program we're talking about is basically what's left, is what they focus on, and a lot of stuff has been shut down besides that.
Yeah, and they also have to get help from Europe and Russia.
Yeah.
To do these things.
Yeah. So do we know why they're focusing on the Mars program and have shut so much else down?
No, I think there are people in NASA fighting to keep it alive.
Okay,
It's not the government. I mean, Obama, he's cutting the budget the whole time. He wants to kill it. He doesn't believe in that. He's a Malthusian himself.
Yeah, he's on the team that doesn't want people to discover what is possible.
Yeah.
Travel and stuff like that.
He has that green madness in him since he was a so-called student, activist. I mean, his friend, John Holdren, I think, is the advisor on environment.
Sure.
He wrote these...
And you know about the Operation Fast and Furious?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, that's also one scandal waiting to...
Obama's old friend. Is John Holdren Obama's old friend?
Yeah. No, there's his scientific advisor, Holdren, I think his name is.
Oh, that John Holdren.
Yeah, I think so. He wrote a book.
Not Eric Holder. Oh, okay.
Yeah. He wrote a book, I think, in the 70s, how to reduce the world population, and he even proposed to sterilize people through drinking water. Whole society to sterilize people, so they don't produce. He's the scientific advisor of Obama.
Sure. Oh.
If you have,
that's why they have fluoride in the water in the United States.
Yeah.
It's kind of fascist ideas.
Yes.
Nazi ideas.
Yes.
Nazi ideas, race control.
I mean, all the environmentalist stuff and population stuff, it came out from the same people who were running the race biology, the eugenics.
Yeah.
I mean, in Britain you had Huxley, Aldous Huxley. He was the chairman of the British Eugenics Society. In Sweden we have the same people. I mean, Sweden was very active in eugenics. Nazi doctors used to come to Sweden, to Uppsala, to get education because we're pioneers in measuring people's skulls and discovering this. The same people after the war, I mean, they wrote this manifesto which said Hitler made eugenics unpopular, so we are washing our hands from eugenics, but the real threat is population explosion and the environmentalist problem.
Sure,
That's became the after the war period. This became the new eugenics, actually, but it's different. They say, yeah, it's not good to do what Hitler did, but we have to reduce population, we have to stop this industrialization process in the name of protecting nature, conservation of animals, and then the World Wildlife Fund for Nature started in '61.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the eugenics program, because it's also a label that you confront mainstream media or politicians, they just call it conspiracy theory. It's like they have this spell around them.
They have advertisements all over the city.
But people in charge are denying it.
No, this environmentalist movement is part of the Empire Project. I mean, it looks more good intentioned, and it's easier to sell to people than saying we want to kill black people. You know, it's like you say we want to protect the environment.
We have a question from someone in the audience about the question of the thorium. If you endorse the thorium cycle form of nuclear energy.
As a source.
Yes, there is.
As a source for new power plants.
Yeah, I'm not really the expert on that, but there is a discussion. I mean, some of our people have listened to their discussions. They support the idea, but how in detail it would work and if it's could be generalized, that's a different thing. I don't know really, but I mean, we have said that the thorium cycle, that's fine. Yes, yes. I mean, nothing is impossible if you develop and do research on it.
Yeah, but it could be economical.
Yes.
Bad.
Yeah.
As taking salt water to fresh water.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, we will need all kinds of technologies. You know, it's not one type. People can develop all new ideas. That's right. I mean, in India, I think they are very active with in India, the thorium reactor development.
Thank you. Very good.
Thank you for coming. Hope you support us.
The forum is that kind of a fusion.
It's a type of fishing, but what you have is good. You don't have this waste.